Soulframe weapon combat is better than I thought. Archery was definitely love at first shot, but even the melee combat in this game has really grown on me as I've learned more about how it works. So let's talk about it. I really struggled with melee combat when I first started playing Soulframe. Perhaps this is easier for people with a different gaming background than I have, but as someone with experience with MMOs, third-person shooters, and many years in Warframe, the controls were not immediately intuitive. Even so, I'm too much of a completionist not to level everything, so I steeled myself to max out every weapon, and found myself really enjoying them by the end. Figuring out how weapon combat actually works made a huge difference for me, so I hope this introductory guide will help you too. Let's start with melee combat. Every melee weapon has 3 attack types that serve as a sort of foundation for combat: a basic attack, a heavy attack, and a thrown attack. Your heavy attack does more damage than a basic attack, but it also has a longer animation. Pressing your heavy attack button will immediately perform a heavy attack, whereas holding it down will charge your heavy attack, increasing its damage. The longer you charge, the more extra damage you do. When the heavy attack is fully charged, your weapon will flash with a golden glow and your envoy will attack. Jumping and pressing your heavy attack key while in the air will perform a ground slam. Your heavy attack and thrown attack share a keybind. To throw your weapon, hold down block and then push your melee throw/recall button. After a throw, you'll need to recall your weapon by tapping this key again. Until you do so, your attacks will be an unarmed strike with your pact-bearing arm. The damage for this strike is modified by the pact you're wearing. You can recall a weapon before it hits a target, and your weapon can deal damage if it hits a target on its way back to you. The combat art Perfect Throw will give you a bar with an indicator when you throw your weapon. If you release your throw when the indicator is in the highlighted portion of the bar, you'll deal more damage with the attack. Holding your block key will prevent damage from most attacks, causing you to take stagger instead. The white bar under your health indicator shows how much stagger you've taken. When the bar fills, your block breaks and the attack that broke it will knock you prone. Your weapons also deal stagger to blocking enemies. Enemy stagger bars appear as a white border around their level icon. When an enemy's block is broken, they will be temporarily stunned and open to finishers, which we'll get to in a moment. Shields get a shield bash attack when you use your attack keybind while blocking. This attack does less damage than a normal basic attack, but more stagger. If you enable throw/shoot with melee attack in the accessibility settings, you will still need to use your heavy attack keybind to throw your shield, because attacking while blocking is reserved for your shield bash. Blocking at just the right time will parry an attack, indicated by a golden flash and a unique sound. If you successfully parry, you will not take stagger and will instead deal stagger to the attacker. The riposte combat art allows you to follow a parry with a series of special attacks that deal extra damage, but enemies will sometimes block the second or third strike. Enemy heavy attacks can only be parried if you put points in the unyielding combat art. These combat arts are not available on every weapon, so check the weapon you're using to see which arts you can invest in. Pressing your dodge key will cause you to hop in whatever direction you were moving, or backwards if you had no movement input, and give you a very brief iframe. If you're sprinting when you dodge, or if you hit your sprint and dodge keys at the same time, your dodge will be a roll instead of a hop. The roll provides more movement, but the iframe seems to be about the same. If you time your dodge exactly right to avoid an attack, it will register as a perfect dodge. This is also indicated by a flash and a sound, but the cues for a perfect dodge are a bit more subtle than the cues for a parry. The combat art Spectre Strike will allow you to perform a special attack immediately after a perfect dodge, which functions very similarly to riposte. Finishers are special attacks that do tremendous amounts of damage. You can make an enemy vulnerable to finishers by dealing enough stagger to break their block. When an enemy can be finished, you'll see this special icon pop up in front of them when you get close. Attacking that enemy while this icon is up will initiate the finisher. Despite the name, finishers will not always completely kill an enemy. Rather, they do a massive amount of damage that will often, but not always, kill the enemy outright. Sneak attacks could possibly be considered another type of finisher. They share the same activation icon as finishers and do a large amount of damage that is often but not always lethal. Sneaking up on an unalerted enemy will make them vulnerable to a sneak attack, and this is possible with or without Siren's Glamour. Pictrix Powder also makes some enemy types vulnerable to an attack that could arguably be either a sneak attack or a finisher. Ground finishers, on the other hand, are a bit different. This here is the most important tip I have to offer in this video. Enable Controller Aim Assist. Yes, even if you play with keyboard and mouse. If you disable controller aim assist, you will not be able to hit enemies that are prone and will not be able to perform ground finishers. Ground finishers are unlike other finishers in that they don't have a special icon to indicate when an enemy is vulnerable. Perhaps the devs feel that their being prone is indication enough. Otherwise, ground finishers seem to function identically to other finishers, although they do have their own animations. I spent an infuriatingly long time trying to figure out how to do a ground finisher before I realized I needed to enable controller aim assist. You can find it in your accessibility settings. So that's melee combat. Understanding these basic combat mechanics fundamentally changed my experience of Soulframe's melee weapons. The game incentivizes strategic fighting by rewarding you for precisely timed dodges and parries, while punishing you for mindlessly slashing at enemies. It is possible to animation cancel with blocking and dodging, but the controls are not responsive enough for purely reflexive gameplay. I'm personally still on the fence about this last bit. I love games that feel so intuitive that I can forget the keyboard and mouse entirely and immerse myself in the combat. Soulframe's archery does this for me, but the melee combat does not. It's definitely still fun, and perhaps just not meant for my particular tastes in gaming, and that's okay. The one genuine complaint I have, though, is the targeting. You'll notice that most of the clips I've included until now show me fighting only 1 or 2 enemies at a time. This is because Soulframe's targeting system will lock you on to whatever it thinks you should fight, and changing that target lock is extremely difficult. If you aggro a large group and want to pick off enemies strategically based on how they fight or how much damage they do, that's too bad. Your character will fight whoever you're locked onto until you kill it or until you finally manage to convince the game to target something else. Getting the game to switch targets is usually so difficult that it's more efficient to just kite around until you can kill whatever the game wants you to kill, and then hope the next enemy you get locked onto makes a bit more sense. I'm a huge fan of reticle aim in games, even for melee combat, so it may be that I am just not the target audience for Soulframe's melee. Even so, this target lock system seems to go against every other aspect of Soulframe's combat design. Rewarding players for strategically choosing from different types of attacks but locking them onto a single target just does not make any sense. I know this is the harshest criticism I've given Soulframe so far, so I want to reiterate here that I still love the game. I'm being brutally honest in this moment because I want all of you to know that when I'm being optimistic and enthusiastic about Soulframe, that's genuinely how I feel about the game. DE has a long history of listening to community feedback and responding with positive change. I think it's only a matter of time before the targeting gets adjusted, and I'll be out there with my sword and shield to try out the new system. Speaking of targeting, I need to adjust my previous assessment of Odiak. For all that my weapon tier list was pure humor, my frustration with Odiak's aiming was very real, until I learned how to aim it. Odiak has 2 types of attack, a basic attack and a charged attack. The charged attack deals more damage the more you charge it until it's fully charged, just like a melee heavy attack. Odiak also has a block which can't parry but can reflect voltaic projectiles with points in the polarized combat art. Odiak's targeting seems to use the melee target lock system, albeit with a very strange obsession for nearby boxes. However, if you hold block while you attack, as if you were aiming your bow, the game will switch to reticle aiming just as it does for melee thrown attacks. Odiak's projectiles are not terribly fast, so hitting your shots isn't as easy as with a bow, but it's still much more consistent and much less frustrating than dealing with the target lock issues. This is how I finally managed to get my Odiak maxed out, and it honestly changed my opinion on this weapon. It's very fun to play and does quite respectable damage. These gauntlets are going to be absolute beasts whenever the targeting system gets adjusted. And of course, I saved the best for last. Let's talk bows. Soulframe archery is phenomenal. Bows have 3 types of attack. Your envoy will begin to draw an arrow when you press your attack button and fire a basic shot when you release it. If you hold the attack button long enough, the arrow will flash golden, and when you release that arrow, it will be a charge shot. You can zoom in on your targets to aim by holding down your block key. You can begin to aim after you've started drawing an arrow, but releasing your aim will cancel your shot. I'm not a huge fan of this mechanic. I'd rather be able to go in and out of aiming during combat like we can in Warframe. It is a useful way to animation cancel, but I personally prefer dodge canceling. When you press your heavy attack keybind, your envoy will prepare to shoot a hail of arrows, and this too will fire on release. While the basic shot animation is pretty fast and allows for effective quick fires in combat, the hail of arrows animation is much longer, which is probably a good thing for game balance. If you tap your hail of arrows keybind, the whole animation still needs to play for the hail to activate, and the arrows will fall on the area you were targeting when the animation finishes. You can cancel the animation, which will stop the hail. Basic shots and hails will embed arrows where you fire them. The combat art Splinter will cause those arrows to explode when you land a charged shot nearby. Splintering deals a small amount of damage and a decent amount of stagger. Bows really start to shine when it comes to headshots. Every weapon can headshot, but it's definitely easiest to do with a bow. Arrows do have a drop, so you need to adjust for your distance to the target. I like that there are projectile physics in Soulframe because I enjoy the challenge they add to ranged combat, but I wish DE would revisit how arrows behave. They don't seem to have a curve, just a flat drop which begins immediately. The ballistics just feel a bit unnatural, and I find myself having to aim over enemy heads even when they're in relatively close range. It's not a huge deal, but it does feel a bit uncanny valley at times. Anyway, headshots seem to have a damage multiplier of about 1.5, and this looks to be consistent across weapons. What makes this so powerful on bow is that it stacks with the charge shot multiplier. This can result in some really spectacular numbers. Starting combat with a charged headshot is a great way to make any engagement a lot shorter. Bows can perform finishers, sneak attacks, parries, and ripostes just like every other weapon. I especially like the sneak attack animation. The arrow stab is such a cool idea and it feels super satisfying in-game. When it comes to parry and riposte though, I have mixed feelings. As much as I enjoy stabbing enemies with arrows, with so few nodes available in combat arts, I'd love to see riposte and vaunt swapped out for something that increases projectile speed or lets us smite at longer range. Speaking of smite, there are no crits in Soulframe. Instead, we have the smite mechanic. I talked about this a bit in my video on packs, but basically, instead of a critical hit, enemy souls will sometimes become vulnerable during combat. You can tap your soul mode key to tear that soul out and deal significant damage to the target. Finally, I have to at least mention Sidearms. DevStream 7 gave us our first look at what the weapon swap keybind is for. Sadly, we won't get to equip two different main weapons and swap between them, but we will have a new weapon category called Sidearms, and we'll be able to swap between our sidearm and our main weapon. So far, I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about Sidearms. I love the idea of having a hunting dagger for a close-range melee option, and what they showed on stream looks pretty good. Between Sidearms and the moat rework, I'm going to have a lot to cover in Preludes 10, and I am here for it. If you enjoyed this video, a like, comment, or subscribe really help out the channel. I hope you're having as much fun in Soulframe as I am, and until next time, happy hunting!